Week 15 of the fantasy football season, and obviously a crucial week here with the first week of the playoffs for fantasy owners. And his running back starts to sit every ball game this week. The first one, San Francisco 49ers at the Seattle Seahawks on Thursday Night Football. So Christian McCaffrey, what a season it's been for him. And as long as he's healthy, he's obviously a top 3 running back each and every week. And this week, versus a pretty weak Seattle Seahawks defense, Christian McCaffrey's going to roll once again and have a good ball game, so he's a start. Jordan Mason, he's been filling in for the Eli Mitchell role here for this 49er team, and he's playing good football, but he's not getting enough work. Only 8 or 9 touches per ball game here, and you got to see a little bit more out of him in an expanded role for him to be really a fantasy factor. So this week he's a sit. Now to the Seattle Seahawks, Kenny Walker, if he does play in this game, obviously he's a must-start and a matchup-proof running back. But now with the short week, obviously, I'm missing last week's ball game here for Walker with the injury. I don't know if he's going to play, but if he plays, he's a start. And Travis Homer, who got the bulk of the touches in Week 14's loss to the Carolina Panthers, is a sit for me with a tough matchup versus San Francisco and a guy who's not really in between the tackles running back here. I can't trust him in a playoff situation, and I got him as a sit this week. Now to the Indianapolis Colts at the Minnesota Vikings. Jonathan Taylor, I know he hasn't lived up to that number 1 pick overall this year with injuries and some bad ball games, but this week here versus a mediocre Minnesota defense, I think Taylor could roll and have a decent ball game. And if you came this far, obviously to the playoffs now, you're going to put him in the lineup. Now to Dalvin Cook, he hasn't been that great this season. We know he's had a couple blow-up games, but besides that, he's been a mediocre running back with behind the top 10 in the rankings this season here. So right now, Dalvin Cook, I'm still going to put him as a starter. He's still put up at minimum number 2 running back numbers. And this week here in a decent matchup versus an Indianapolis Colts defense that doesn't travel well on the road here, I think Cook could get 80, 90 total yards and find the end zone. Now to the Ravens at the Cleveland Browns. Gus Edwards, he's looked all right. J.K. Dobbins, he returned last week. But I still can't trust these guys either in a playoff situation. So at best, if you don't have any other options, they're borderline options to me. With Edwards obviously being the short yardage running back, and Dobbins, they're trying to get him at full health, even though he admitted he's not at full health yet. Here's J.K. Dobbins. So this week here, he's a borderline option. Now to the Brown side of things, Nick Chubb, you start him each and every week. I know the numbers have definitely went down over the last few weeks, and this Brown team obviously passing the football more with Deshaun Watson back in the lineup. But right now, you're still starting Nick Chubb. He could pop off anytime. And who else are you really going to have that took you this far to get to the playoffs here if you're going to sit Nick Chubb? So he's a start this week. And Kareem Hunt, on the other hand, he's a guy mentioned in my drop videos the other day that he was a droppable player. He's not really doing much. He's not getting many carries. And like I said, with Deshaun Watson in the offense, this Brown team don't run the football that much here. And it's just Nick Chubb getting his carries and Hunt getting a few change of pace work carries as well. Now to the last game on Saturday. Saturday Night Football, Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. Jeff Wilson Jr., he got off to a good start the first few weeks after traded to Miami. But this week here with a tough matchup and struggles, and he's nicked up with a little bit of injuries as well here. He's a sit for me. And Raheem Mostert, he's another guy. He just hasn't been producing over the last few weeks here. Is Raheem Mostert. So this week, he's a sit for me as well. Tough matchup versus the Bills. Going to be freezing on Saturday night. For all we know, there could be some snow in the forecast once again. And it's going to be a tough ball game where I think the Bills, they're just going to have to try to beat him and see if he could play that deep ball, yard football with obviously Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. But both these running backs are sits for me. Now to the Bills side of things, Devin Singletary, I think could carve out a decent role in a ball game in this one. Obviously, he's a number 2 running back or flex option. I have him because he's still getting the bulk of the carries. I know James Cook a few weeks ago had a decent ball game with 16 fantasy points, but last week Cook only had a limited amount of touches and he didn't do much. So Cook's a borderline guy, and Singletary is a number 2 running back or flex option. I think he'll be fine this week. Now to the Cowboys at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard right now, probably the best 1-2 combo in the backfield in fantasy football on the same team. Ezekiel Elliott, he's finding the end zone on goal line touches. He looks a little more healthy. He looks a little more quicker as well with less of a workload this season, and it's really helped him and this Cowboy team. And then to Tony Pollard, one of the best playmakers in fantasy football this season here, where it seems like he gets 20-plus points a week, Tony Pollard, on a limited workload with only 12, 15 touches per game. So this week here versus a mediocre Jacksonville D, well, I think this Cowboy running game could exploit them this week here. They're both starts now to Travis Etienne. I know last week was a total dud for him in a ball game when this Jacksonville offense went off, where Etienne only scored 4 fantasy points. But this week here, I know it's a tough defense at the Dallas Cowboys, but one of their better run snuffers, Hankins, he's going to be out for multiple weeks now, so I think Etienne can find the holes. We know he's a decent wide receiver out of the backfield as Travis Etienne. And this week here, I got him as a start, even in a tough matchup versus the Cowboys. Now to the Falcons. At the New Orleans Saints, Cordell Patterson, Tyler Algier, they're not just getting enough volume or enough work to get the job done, especially in a playoff situation here, where I'm going to trust these guys. We know Marcus Mariota ain't the quarterback anymore. They went to the rookie, but still, I can't trust Cordell Patterson. He was injury-prone this season as well. And if you have better options, you definitely should steer away. And Tyler Algier, he's actually been decent in terms of yard per carry, but he's only getting 8-10 touches a game, and that's not enough production or volume for a guy to be garnered as a fantasy start this week. And now to Alvin Kamara, it hasn't been that great of a season here for Alvin Kamara, but he's still a guy that's putting up number 2 running back numbers at minimum. And this week here, in a good matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons, that don't stop anyone. And also coming off a bye week where he should be refreshed a little bit is Kamara and the Saint offense. I'm going to put him out there and put him in my lineup. Now to the Kansas City Chiefs. At the Houston Texans, Pacheco and McKinnon starts for me. JERRICK McKinnon came out of nowhere last week with over 30 fantasy points, which was some monster of a ball game here. And Pacheco, he's the goal line guy, obviously, for the most part, in between the tackle guys. And I think this 1-2 combo works very well for this Kansas City Chief running game. Obviously, Clyde Edwards-Helaire was in the mix, but he's been out now the last few weeks here with an ankle sprain. And they really haven't missed a beat over there in Kansas City. So this week here in a great matchup for this 1-2 combo at the Texans that can't stop anyone. And we saw the Cowboys backfield and Pollard and Elliott destroy them last week. I could see the same here for the Chiefs. Now Rex Burkhead and Daria Gubale will probably be splitting the carries here with word out that Damian Pierce is out the next 2 weeks here with a sprained ankle. And you can't trust these guys in a big situation. I know Burkhead has some appeal as a PPR guy who could catch the ball out of the backfield. But in a playoff game, yeah, you're going to probably pick Burkhead up and stash him on your bench. But no way you're going to start him unless you have no other options this week. So both these guys are easy sits for me, especially in a ball game where they're going to be trailing early and often here as this Houston Texan team, I would think. Now to the Philadelphia Eagles at the Chicago Bears. Miles Sanders, the last few weeks here, he's turning it up just at the right time for fantasy owners. Last week with over 25 fantasy points. This week here, a little stiffer of a matchup than he had last week versus a Giant defense that can't stop the run. But right here, he's a star once again, Miles Sanders. Rock and roll him as a top 15 running back this week, even versus a mediocre Bear defense. And out to the Bears, David Montgomery is a sit for me. He's too Jekyll and Hyde this season. He'll have one big game, and then he'll disappear games on end, and then he'll go off again, and then you'll put him in your starting lineup, and that's where he won't do nothing. So right here versus a tough Eagle defense, and obviously this Eagle team, the script's been all year. They get up 10, 14 points, and teams got to play catch-up. I don't see Montgomery doing much in this ball game, and he's a sit for me. Now to the Lions at the New York Jets. Tough matchup for the Lions running game. DeAndre Swift, we know he's not been healthy the whole season, even though he's been playing through it for the most part this year. So he's a borderline option for me this week for this Detroit Lion team. And Jamal Williams, he's pretty much a touchdown dependable running back. If he don't get that touchdown, he's pretty much maxing out at 7-8 fantasy points. So this week at borderline options with a tough matchup. This Lion offense plays different on the road. We're only 2 games over 24 points scored by this offense. And this Jet defense is definitely the real deal, especially stopping the run. So this week, both borderline options at best. Now to the Jet side of things, Michael Carter and Zonovan Knight, the running backs over there for the New York Jets. And Zonovan Knight, he's played good football over the first 3 weeks here, that he's been getting an expanded role in this Jet offense. But this week here, Carter's back in the mix. These guys are probably going to split or come close to a split. Even though I like Knight better, at this week they're borderline options. And Ty Johnson, we know he's working in there on third downs for this Jet team. But in a playoff situation, he don't get enough volume or enough snaps to garner a start for me. Now to the Steelers at the Carolina Panthers. Najee Harris, I know he was a first-round pick. I know he's not putting up the big numbers this season here for the Steelers. But at minimum, he's putting up number 2 running back numbers here is Najee Harris. So once again, in a pretty good matchup at the Carolina Panthers. I'm going to roll him out there in my starting lineup. He's getting goal line. I know he's not catching the ball out of the backfield really this season, which is definitely a disappointment here for Najee Harris. But this week, I got him as a start. Now to the Panthers, D'Onta Foreman and Chuba Hubbard. Last week, Foreman, he didn't do much in that ball game. Chuba Hubbard and even Blackshear got some work in that one, where Foreman only had 6 fantasy points in last week's game. So this week here in a ball game versus a pretty tough Steeler defense versus the run, these guys are borderline options for me. Chuba Hubbard, it was good to see him go out there and score 18 fantasy points. But just each and every week, we don't know how the game script's going to go for this Panther offense. And these guys as well, I can't fully trust them, so they're borderline options to me. Now to the Patriots at the Raiders. Ramondre Stevenson, we know he left Monday Night Football twice in that game, and the second time left them out for the remainder of the game, where we saw Pierre Strong and Kevin Harris take over in the backfield. But Stevenson, he's a start each and every week, so if he plays in this ball game, he's a start. Damian Harris, it looks like he could possibly be back in this ball game after we were spotting him on the sidelines versus the Cardinals, cheering his team on, where he didn't really look that banged up. So Harris, if he plays and Stevenson's out, he's a start. But obviously if Stevenson plays, Harris is a bench for me. And now to Strong and Harris, if they got a split in the backfield, if both those guys are out, they're borderline options. They're definitely guys to pick up off the wire if they're still there for fantasy owners and stash them to see what happens. But right now, if they're starting or splitting carries in this game, if Stevenson and Harris are out, they're both borderline options. And now to Josh Jacobs, as long as he's healthy and playing. I know he banged his finger up in that Thursday Night Football game versus the Rams. He's a start each and every week, and believe it or not, he leads the league in fantasy points at the running back position. Now to the Arizona Cardinals at the Denver Broncos. In this ball game, one of the worst games on the slate this week here. Both quarterbacks hurt. Kyle Murray out for the season, obviously torn ACL, so we wish him a speedy recovery. And Russell Wilson, he ate some turf in that last game, hitting his head hard versus the Kansas City Chiefs. So James Conner, he's been pretty solid over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And to be honest here, this offense ain't that bad. Well, Colt McCoy at the helm. He's a guy that can run the offense. He don't turn the ball over that much as Colt McCoy. And he's a guy that could get James Conner a few balls out of the backfield on some dump-offs. And Conner, we know, is the full workhorse over there for this Cardinal team. So he's a start this week. And Latavius Murray, a borderline option. I know this ball game, mid-teens, low 20s in this one between these teams. We know this offenses are going to have backup quarterbacks playing. We know they're not dynamic. And Latavius Murray, he's a guy that's pretty much good for 10 points each week. So if you want to do that and max out on that, that's what I'm going to have him this week here as a borderline option is Latavius Murray. I know Marlon Mack got some work, and I know obviously that Mike Boone's going to be out of this game, but right now the only guy for fantasy purposes is Latavius Murray in this one. Now to the Tennessee Titans at the Los Angeles Chargers. So right here, Derrick Henry, you fire him up each and every week as a start. I know this Titan offense has looked pretty bad over the last couple weeks here, but Derrick Henry's still putting up numbers. You drafted him in the first round for a reason, and he's lived up to it once again this season. And Austin Eckler, same thing. PPR machine, catches 3-4 balls out of the backfield. Pretty much 20-plus points each week here. And this Titan team's reeling in a big way, so Eckler is definitely a start this week. Now to the Bucks at the Cincinnati Bengals. Leonard Fournette, Rachaad White, pretty good 1-2 combo in the backfield here for this Buck team. And this Buck offense pretty much in the passing game hasn't done much. Mike Evans hasn't been the same this season. Chris Godwin, couple good games here and there, but for the most part, he's not 100% healthy. And these running backs in Fournette and White, they're getting 3-4 catches minimum per game between each guy here. So right now, White's been a good player over the last couple weeks with the expanded role. And it wouldn't surprise me next season if he's the starter for this team and Fournette is gone. But anyway, both this week here in a decent matchup in a possible shootout, I like both these running backs. And now to the Bengals, Joe Mixon, I know it hasn't been the greatest a season here, and Samaje Perine, some people could argue, has looked like the better back in an expanded role over the last few weeks before Mixon came back in Week 14. But this week, Mixon, he helped you get this far into the fantasy season. I still think in a decent matchup, he's a start. Now to the Giants at the Commanders, Sunday Night Football, Saquon Barkley, he's a start. I know the numbers have dropped, and I know the workload is definitely taking effect at Saquon Barkley over the last few weeks. But versus Washington, I think he could go off and have one of those patented games. And obviously, fantasy owners aren't going to want to miss out on that in a good one here at the Commanders. And he's a start. And Gibson and Robinson a couple weeks ago versus the Giants. Had good ball games, and I think this week is flex options or low-end number 2 running backs. They definitely could be starting options. Gibson's a good receiver out of the backfield, getting some goal line work as well. And Robinson, we know, is the bruiser and short yardage guy with goal line work as well. So a couple weeks ago, they had good ball games in that 2020 tie with these running backs. And now coming off the bye week here, I think it's going to be refreshed as well as Gibson and Robinson. And this week here, they're solid number 2 options to flex guys. And now the final game of the week, Rams at the Packers. Cam Akers and KYREN Williams, not seeing enough out of them to go on our starting spot each and every week. I know Akers had a good ball game a few weeks ago. Looks like Baker Mayfield's going to be the quarterback in this game here for this Los Angeles Ram team. But I can't trust these running backs. They're not putting up numbers consistently. It's been a tough season here, and this offensive line not that great as well. And the Packers freshened up as well coming off the bye week. And in a cold atmosphere in Green Bay, there's no way these running backs do much in this one, I think. Now to the Packers, Aaron Jones, you start him each and every week. One of the better running backs, believe it or not, in fantasy football, even though he got off to a slow start this season here. Aaron Jones has been pretty solid, and he's a guy that Aaron Rodgers and this offense counts on, even out of the backfield catching passes. So he's a start. And A.J. Dillon, the last few weeks, he's finally came on and dumped some things here as Dillon, putting up some decent numbers, but he's still not a guy I could trust 100%. And this Ram defense possibly could get Aaron Donald back in this one after getting pretty much a mini bye week, missing Thursday's ball game in week 14 for Aaron Donald. So right here, this Packer offensive line not that great. A.J. Dillon, tough to trust in a playoff situation, but if you're in a pinch, he's a borderline option. So that's running backs start to sit here week 15 every matchup of the fantasy football season.